Hey, welcome. I am Kath Nolan, once high-performing perfectionist good girl turned goddess of balance, kicking even bigger goals. This is the podcast where we make balance doable for busy, overstretched working women. Embracing your voice, your feminine power and energy allows you to truly step into greatness for the sake of you and all you hold dear. This is balance. The episode you're about to hear is one of my earliest episodes when the podcast was called Don't Be Asked and our focus was on building courage. Since then, you have evolved and so have I. You have fierce courage when it comes to others. And now it's time to balance what you're willing to do for others with what you're willing to do for yourself. Let's go, my friend. Let's bring balance into your life. So Mel is a celebrity psychologist and resident relationship coach on MAFS UK and MAFS Australia. She is highly regarded in my world of corporate leadership. She's a mum, a wife. She has a new puppy, Charlie, who matches my furball Bronte, although Charlie's a full-size Groodle. Well, he will be, and Bronte's a mini. And as we speak, Mel is days away from launching her book, The C Word, with some super interesting chapters. I can't wait to get my hands on it. Mel and I used to work together. Actually, we are both coaches who worked in the same business a few years back and recently caught up to chat like giggling schoolgirls and then down to business on a serious topic. Can you hold your confidence when you're going through a toxic work relationships? Can you hold on to your confidence? So can you, Mel? Can you really? Like, a whole lot of businesses don't really handle workplace toxicity that well. They don't know what to do. So it's just tolerated. It's ignored. So can you stay with the toxic boss and stay confident? Mel votes yes. And she's got some fab takeaways, some really specific, pragmatic takeaways. I found it super interesting that her bar for toxic was quite low. There's a lot of damage can be done at the mildly uncomfortable level, way before you're questioning whether to quit. It's really interesting, the difference between the Australian market and the UK market. And Mel and I talk a bit about that in this chat. Mel's a corporate girl like us, a vibrant, fab communicator. She brings her signature energy and she does not pull punches. Here's Mel. Mel, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to have you here. So Mel, obviously our backgrounds have crossed paths before, but as we've said, we've taken a slightly different deviation. And I guess the big thing that I wanted to ask you about is, the world knows you as a relationship coach. Our corporate backgrounds are closely aligned. So the big question I want to kick off with is, you're building courage, I'm building courage. Why do you think, what's your take on why courage is so desperately needed?
Well, I look at it through very much a feminine lens. So, my clients and, my book is for women. Most of the people that I work with are women. And even when I was in corporate, a lot of the work that I did skewed towards working with female leaders. And I love that. That's what I'm passionate about. And I think if you're talking about courage and confidence, whether you're talking to men or women, it's a very different conversation. And it's a very different experience. And one of the real drivers for me to focus in on confidence for women is that I believe there's a massive confidence gender gap. It goes right back to our socialization and the way that, we are told, we are educated, it is role modeled for us that boys are faster, boys are stronger, boys are cleverer, boys are more confident. And, for many of us, that becomes that internal voice, and we really start to buy into that and believe that, I couldn't do that, or I couldn't quite put myself forward for that. Did you see that research that HP, Hewlett Packard, did about applying for the job?
No.
Confidence was so HP. Interesting. HP. So they basically had a position description and had a group of men and women look at it and to basically assess themselves against the criteria and make a decision about whether they would apply for that job. And you're not going to be surprised to hear that the majority of the men would apply for the job if they only met 60% of the criteria, whereas women would only apply for the job if they met 100%. 99, 100. So there's look at that and see that as a quantifiable way of understanding the confidence gap here. You know, men look at the 40% gap and go, no worries, I'll blag my way through it. I'll jump in and figure it out on the way. Whereas women, even if we're at, 95%, we go, I'm not sure I'm quite qualified. I'm not really the right person. And then we start talking ourselves out of it, and all the reasons and excuses start to flow.
Totally.
So I found that really, really powerful. I think, if there was any kind of, I guess, tipping point for me to really dive into this whole area of confidence, it was that piece of research, because I just think it's so simple and clear, and it just speaks volumes.
It really does, doesn't it? And now, in my experience, women don't just need to feel as though they have 100% of the qualifications to apply for that role. They also need to be on a winning streak, and they need to have a good hair day, and they need to have an outfit in the wardrobe ready to go. There's all these other factors that need to be in play before we feel as though we want to raise our hands. But Mel, what about, so I also work with women in leadership, primarily work with women in leadership, and I'm so often really surprised by the number of people who say, we shouldn't treat men and women differently in leadership. We don't need we don't need to fix women, for example. It seems to be that when we talk about giving women more courage, or, encouraging that courage, I get this objection. We don't need to fix women. We need to fix the system.
Yep. I get that too.
Yeah.
And I often get the criticism, why are you blaming women? Why do women have to change? Why do women have to step up?
Yeah.
And to that I say, well, you don't have to. But if you want to actually achieve happiness and success and fulfillment in this really patriarchal society, then sister, get on board, right? There are things in this life that we can change and things that we can't. Right now, we can't fix the patriarchy. Can't change it too much. We can't change organizational structures. We can't change laws. We can't change what's happening at that socio-political level. That stuff is happening to us, whether we like it or not. Yes, we can change things at grassroots, but on the whole, we can't change that stuff. What we can change is how we respond to it. And this is where learning confidence skills sits. I think this is where we can take some accountability and responsibility for the way that we show up, and the way that we cut through all of that stuff. This is about not being a victim to the way society is constructed and the way that organizations operate. This is about saying, okay, that stuff exists, I get it, but I am going to do what I can within my sphere of influence to firstly expand that, and secondly to take some constructive steps towards getting what I want. I get a bit passionate about this.
Yeah, beautiful. And we need to. We really need to. I think one of the challenges I find is that apathy is a harsh word for it, but that's the issue, where people aren't actually aware that they've been conditioned this way. They're not necessarily aware of those systems, that bigger picture issue that they're fighting against. They're not aware of it.
I mean, probably because I live and breathe this stuff, I find it so hard to imagine someone could not be aware of it, because it's everywhere. But I think you're right. I think there's a level of sensory adaptation, isn't it? It's we are bombarded with these messages and all of the nuance that sits around our culture, and it does just become white noise in the background, and I guess it's not that noticeable unless you choose to tune into it.
Mel, there seems to be, I think, a bit of a difference between the UK market and the Australian market, in that there seems to be more of that apathy here than there is in the UK for the gender gap. And I think that the culture that we have here, that she'll be right, mate culture, has so much to answer for.
Oh, Kath, don't get me started. I think it's more than just she'll be right. Since being here, I've noticed the most incredible difference in a whole range of cultural nuances, I guess, between
Yeah.
Australia and UK, particularly around diversity and inclusion. You know, there is, I mean, for example, you just look at the show Married at First Sight that I'm on in both Australia and UK. It's great to have that comparison point. It's literally the same show, the same production in different countries.
Yes.
In the UK, for starters, I'm the only white person on the panel. You know, the other two people are people of color. And you know, you look at the diversity in the group of the couples that we're talking to, and it's just people from all walks of life, you know, all gender, sexual orientations, the whole thing. And that's just a little example of, you know, the openness that the UK is starting to embrace. When it comes to gender and gender differences, I feel like there's a lot more of, you know, in Australia, there's been kind of whispers around, you know, male champions of change and, you know, actually getting men on board and, you know, helping to create a bigger movement. I hear more of that, and it's more normalized, I think, for both men and women to talk about equality in things like pay equality. You know, for example, I'll only do this job if my female colleague comes in at the same amount. And, you know, that is really powerful because it trickles down.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Mel, we kind of had a bit of a chat online about this idea of having confidence and retaining your confidence if you're living with toxicity, you know. So I'd love to ask you about, I'm going to break it down. So maybe if we can chat first of all about the workplace.
Sure.
Is it possible to have a you know, is it possible to work with a toxic boss and still retain your courage and your professional courage, your confidence?
I believe it's possible. I think I would say it's simple, but it's not easy. Simple in that, you know, you can have some very clear a strategy and some very clear tactics that you want to put in place. But because we're talking about a power imbalance and everything that sits around that dynamic, it's not easy. But really, to me, whether you're in a toxic relationship with your boss, where there is that clear power imbalance, or with a partner where things are, you know, supposed to be relatively equal, I would say a lot of the same practices apply. And, you know, so much of that is about self-preservation and, you know, but also being really clear about what you want from the relationship. You know, I've certainly worked with people who've been in a professional position with a toxic boss and have said to themselves, okay, my goal is to be 3 steps beyond this role in the next 3 years. So this is a very temporary stepping stone. You know, treat it as, you know, as a short-term gig and put your shit shield on and let it all just, you know, it's a podcast, you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm basically saying be like Teflon. Let it slip off. You know, but I recognize that not everyone can do that. Not everyone is in a position for a short period of time, and you can't just, you know, what I'm describing there is essentially suck it up. You know, if it's a short-term thing, you know, I guess that's about weighing up, picking your battles. Is this worth putting my energy into in order to create a better workplace for myself? Short-term gig, probably not. But if it's something that you're more invested in being there for a longer term, then you've got a situation, a very juicy situation to get your hands on. So there's a number of players. There's yourself. As I said, that self-preservation is really important. Then there's the boss, and then there's, you know, the team and the people who circle around you. So from a self perspective, I would say a lot of that comes down to self-talk and the story that you're telling yourself about what's happening in that office, and challenging that. You know, sometimes, and again, this could come back to some of those messages we're delivered, you know, in childhood. Maybe it's in early career, you know, maybe it's about, you know, you've been in an imbalanced team, you know, all of those sort of dysfunctional messages that may have been presented to you throughout your life. It's a good idea to stop and check yourself. You know, what am I telling myself about my relationship with my boss at the moment? Is there any evidence to, you know, if you're saying to yourself, my boss hates me, is there any evidence that your boss has done anything that actually demonstrates that? So, you know, turn into your own little self-detective and really dig deep, and rather than just assuming, oh, it feels uncomfortable, therefore they don't like me, look at all the other possibilities that it could be. You know, could it be that this is about them? Could this be that your boss is uncomfortable with something else, or that they're underconfident in their role? Maybe they're feeling completely insecure. They might even be threatened by you. You know, stranger things have happened. So, you know, doing that real self-checking, I think is a really good exercise. And even use a trusted colleague or a friend or a partner to bounce some of that off. You know, I feel like my boss is picking on me because this happened. What do you think objectively? Does that sound like they're picking on me? Or could it be that I'm really sensitive to this situation because I think they don't like me? So doing a lot of that, and then coming back to, you know, some really simple, I don't like to use the word affirmations because I find it gets caught up with all the woo-woo, but I mean, you know, real strong self statements about, you know, this is what I'm here for. Bringing yourself back to your purpose. This role for me is going to take me to this, or it's going to help me contribute that, or I'm going to change this. You know, what's my mission, my personal mission here, which will really ground you in what's important to you. And then to sort of say to yourself, when my boss does X or does Y, I respond with, and, you know, for you, it might be maturity, grace, and strength, you know, whatever it is that is relevant for you, but repeating that kind of thing that is just, again, bringing you back to what's important to you, trying to keep yourself in a more objective place. So being able to respond to your self-talk, let's say your self-talk is, oh, he hates me, to be able to respond to that with, my boss treats me the way he or she treats everyone else in the team, and they're doing the best they can, for example. You know, so not trying to, you know, turn it into all love and roses, because it's probably not, but even just bringing that negative statement up to that neutral position, you know, where it's just, it almost like an is what it is statement, which takes the sting out of it, takes the emotion out of it.
Yeah, gorgeous.
So then when we look at your boss, you know, you've got a decision to make here about whether you want to invest in having essentially a feedback conversation with your boss.
Yes.
Some people are right up for this, and more power to you. Some people are not, because of course it's difficult. And, you know, it so often plays into all that family of origin stuff, the parent-child relationship, you know, all of that unconscious stuff can come into play there. I mean, gosh, I can certainly remember being in situations earlier in my career where I had, you know, a toxic boss, and willing myself to have that feedback conversation and bursting into tears. You know, not feeling sad or upset, but just it triggering childhood stuff and feeling, like a powerless little girl. And just all of a sudden, all your power drips away, and you just feel like you've got no credibility. And I think anyone who's had a cry in the workplace can relate. It just, it's so frustrating, because you just feel like you're betraying yourself, don't you?
Totally. And it snowballs.
It does. Yeah, it really does. So look, I find a lot of people, women in particularly, would rather avoid having that feedback conversations with a boss. You know, they'd rather rip their own eyelashes out than actually have that conversation. But if you are someone who's up for that, then there's things you can do, you know, to make it safe, and to make it, to maximize the likelihood of success there. And definitely, I would say one thing is to get a crew on board, get yourself a support team. You know, if you might want to have someone in that meeting with you, or you might just want to have those people behind you, just knowing that people have got your back. It's so important that you don't feel isolated in this kind of conversation. You know, it's very, very important to have that support, and, you know, have a strategy in place. Speak in their language. If your boss is a totally left brain numbers person, then go in with that prep, have evidence, have examples, be really bottom line focused if that's what they're focused on. Or if they're a boss that's really, really people focused and is all caught up in, interpersonal dynamics, then go with examples of that.
Yeah.
Examples of of the impact of their behavior on people. Know your audience, know your enemy in this case, keep your enemy close, and really know them and speak in their language, and give yourself a real talking to before going into this meeting in terms of, I'm going to stay objective. This is not an emotional relationship. It's hard. I know this is really hard. I find it hard too, being quite emotionally led in the stuff that I do, but, wherever possible, and pick your moment, know that I feel most energetic and grounded on a Monday morning, or maybe it's at the end of the week on Friday. Even know your cycle if you're a woman, pick that time at the very start of your cycle when you've got that oomph, you've got a bit of extra hormonal support behind you as well. So pick your moments, pick your battles. I've got a little piece in one of the chapters in my book on that. I find that fascinating.
Fantastic.
Mapping out these kind of things with your cycle can be really, really interesting. And it's just about arming yourself with the right tools for that person. This is not one size fits all. Not all toxic bosses are the same. They're not all toxic for the same reason. Then you might say, but what if this person's completely irrational? What if your boss is, one of those sociopathic bosses that exist? They do exist, don't they? I'm sure you've come across loads of them.
It's surprisingly often.
Yeah, I would agree. And, that some of the behaviors that they demonstrate, they're like toddlers in a sandpit. And it's really hard to rationalize with someone who is that childlike, in their behavior. So again, I would say, know your target, go into that meeting. I just mentioned to you before we started our chat that I've got a new puppy. And we're giving him treats to try and change his behavior. Well, do the same with your toxic boss. What kind of treat can you offer? Go in with some bargaining chips so that you've got a bit of negotiation power when you're in there. And then I guess it becomes about the broader system of the team or the organization that you're in, and really just getting some champions on board, particularly if you can find someone at that boss's level that you can, co-opt into really becoming a bit of a backup person, whether they can come to the meeting with you, that would be amazing, because that would just totally throw the power balance out. Or if they're not going to be present, to get their permission to say, I spoke with Jen and she supports this, and, to just have a bit of extra cred so that, if you feel your boss is looking at you as a small being, it's one thing you can do to make yourself a little bit bigger in their toxic eyes.
I love that, Mel. I love that we're speaking the same language. I love that your book is out on my birthday. I've ordered my copy. I hope everyone who hears this
wonderful.
Their copy as well. I'm so excited to read it. And
here it is.
I love how pragmatic. Oh my God, how exciting! Fantastic.
In living color.
Fantastic. Oh my goodness, fantastic. Mel, our mutual buddy Greg Smith, I was chatting with him the other day about, me too. We were chatting about when is the right time to go. But the question I want to ask you is, when is it time to dig deeper? So if you've got some issues that you're facing, you mentioned that, you get emotional in the workplace and you have this tier response to maybe a tier response to frustration or a tier response to anger. And it can be deathly embarrassing and not at all helpful. And sometimes it's helpful for different reasons, but when it's there because you're being vulnerable, that's okay. But when you are tearful and you don't want it there, if it's evidence of some trigger of past hurt or even present hurt that's not appropriate, when is it time to go deeper and sort of step beyond? I love these strategies, even the manifestation strategy that you mentioned about, not going for the positive, because if you go for the positive manifestation statement, if you don't believe that, it can backfire, right? But just that neutral position is divine. But when is it time, Mel, to dig deeper and say, I think I have some stuff to uncover that might be beyond my sort of conscious level here?
Okay. So do you mean in terms of developing that self-awareness and noticing yourself behaving in a different and new way at work? Is that what you mean?
Or even, it may not even be a new way, but where you notice that there are some patterns of behavior that are not helpful. So when is it time to kind of say, okay, I'm not solving this on my own. The chin wag with the girlfriends is not solving this. The situation that I'm in at the moment, I'm finding that I'm getting in similar situations again and again. I can't get out of it. I'm repeating a pattern.
Right.
When is it time to dig deeper and say, actually, I need some bigger help, either from a coach or a counselor, or when is it time to go deeper to find the things that are holding you back?
Great question. And of course, Greg came up with a great question.
Yeah.
Love his guts.
Exactly. I really do.
Brilliant question. And I love that you mentioned there, Kath, about patterns, because as you say, a lot of this stuff happens unconsciously, and it's just a cycle that just keeps playing out and playing out and playing out. And I think if we take a step back first in terms of how do you start to notice this stuff, because sometimes it is just habitual and you don't. And this is where I think a simple tool like journaling can just be so powerful. Whatever that looks like for you, if it's having a the pen and paper and jotting stuff down at night, or if you're an app person, some fantastic apps. One that I use with a lot of my clients is called Mood Kit. MOODKIT. Do you know Mood Kit?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's CBT based. It's brilliant. And it's got a number of different layers. But for this purpose, one of the very simple things it has in there is just this very, very simple mood tracker, where on a daily basis, you literally just put on a scale of 1 to 10, boom, here I am, 7. And if you haven't got time to put anything more in it, that's all you need to do. But then you can print out a report at the end of the week or month, and you can actually see, oh, okay, might need to dig a bit deeper. What was going on there? Oh, that's every Wednesday. Oh, I do notice every Wednesday I have a meeting with that manager and I start to feel crap. So, that sort of thing. And then, of course, you can go deeper and write all of that qualitative stuff about how you're feeling. But, or, you might find that you're more of a verbal person, so maybe having that weekly check-in with a colleague or a mentor is your way of staying on top of that. But I think these days, as responsible leaders, I think the onus is on us to become self-aware. I really don't believe the excuse of naivety or lack of self-awareness actually is worth anything when you're in a leadership role, or even if you're just in a professional career and you're wanting to be the best version of yourself. You're not a reality TV contestant. You actually have to own up and say, this is me, I'm an adult, I'm demonstrating these behaviors that are not serving me. And you don't have that TV show to watch back on to get your self-awareness. You've got to actually do the work. So I really think that self-awareness piece is number one before you can even take this step into what do I do about it. But let's say you've got something in place and you are becoming self-aware and you're noticing patterns, like you said, and let's say it's a pattern of getting, let's say you get passive aggressive. That's a really common one that I see. And let's say you start to notice that when a colleague or someone in your world gives you some feedback that's uncomfortable, you get a bit sarcastic, or maybe you give them a flyaway comment and turn your back and slam a door, or whatever it is to you. Let's say you're noticing some of those really unhealthy behaviors coming in, and it's hit your conscious awareness, so it's on your page now, so you've got to deal with it. I think if you were to make the decision not to deal with it, then you're going backwards. You're
Yeah,
not
of
even
course.
standing still
Yeah.
in terms of development. You know,
Yeah.
you're going to be unraveling, and you're going to be having, I think it's actually really irresponsible, because you're going to be having a negative impact on the people around you. So you're going to become toxic, you know. So noticing an unhealthy pattern in yourself is great. That, you know, that is step one, and that is awesome. I'm now armed with this information I can do something with. And I'm compelled to do it because that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
So boom, what do you do about it?
Yeah.
Well, this is where, you know, I like that your suggestion of a coach. And I think, you know, I mean, obviously I'm biased because I think, you know, having an external objective coach is the most sensational way to get up out of your own head and out of your own emotions, and to be able to have that bird's eye view of what's going on. Because when you're in it, it's so hard, isn't it? It's so hard to be objective, because you're in it, you're feeling it, you're moving through that space every day and being impacted by it. So it's really hard to be objective. But I do think there are other tools that you can use, you know, in your workplace. I mean, I love the idea of peer mentors. You know, yes, you have your more senior or more experienced mentors for certain purposes, but to be able to have a peer who is someone you trust. And I don't mean a friend in this way. I do mean a colleague, a peer mentor, someone where you can have this mutual agreement that we've firstly got each other's backs. You know, this is a, you know, supportive place, but we can also have those robust conversations with each other within safety. So no one's going to tell the boss, you know, it's confidential. We keep it between us. But I can say to you, I noticed on Wednesday when Rob said to you that you made some errors in that report, you flicked him off, you rolled your eyes, and I heard you actually say something under your breath. Now, how do you think Rob felt when that happened? And, you know, to then have to unpack that and play that out. I think that peer support, you know, I'd love to see more of that in a formalized way. You know, I think it naturally happens, doesn't it? You know, when great relationships form, but sometimes there's the crossover with friendship, which makes it a little bit tricky if you're also having those drinks on a Friday night and, you know, talking about your sex life, then it kind of takes some of that objectivity out of it. So I feel like there's something between work wife and buddy that is, you know, still professional, but there's I guess it's professional intimacy, you could say.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to put it. Now, toxicity has come up a few times, right? And you have very publicly called out toxicity. What are your tips for doing that? You've just given us a beautiful example in that peer support description of, you know, sort of calling that out to someone who you have maybe established a relationship with. This is a safe conversation to have. But when you see toxicity in a workplace, what are your tips for calling it out?
So do you mean going public with it, or calling it out within the organization? What do you mean?
Yeah, within the organization. So, you know, when you hear somebody say something that is just not appropriate in this day and age, or you hear someone, you know, there's a lot of leaders who are well-meaning but speak terribly. And they speak in ways that are just not acceptable. They're outdated. They're, you know, whether it's a gender bias that they're using, a cultural bias that they're demonstrating, calling out that kind of toxicity. What are your tips on doing that in the workplace?
Okay, so this is very similar, I guess, to what we were saying before about, you know, giving your boss that feedback, which was a private situation. But maybe now if we take it to, let's say it's a meeting forum. And, you know, I actually had a client have an experience of this recently, and she went into a new role, and her boss was being quite demeaning toward her. And it seemed to be a gender bias, and because she noticed that he wasn't doing the same behavior with the males. And he developed some kind of weird nickname for her that he didn't ask her permission for, and she didn't like it. And so he was calling her that in front of people. And so she very bravely spoke up, and, you know, she said, and she kept it sounded like it was a conversation where there was a bit of, you know, it was a bit of laughter sort of going on. It was a light-hearted kind of conversation. So she kept the tone there and said, oh, you know, she didn't go, oh, she's not Aussie, she's British. She would have said it in a much more refined way than me. I just sounded so Aussie then. Oh, mate. It's something like, if you translate it to British, something like, oh, come on. I'd rather you didn't call me that. How about you call me this instead?
Yeah, sure.
And the fact, I think, that she was able to do it in the tone of the conversation, she maintained eye contact with him. So he knew that she was dead serious.
Yes.
But she didn't embarrass him.
Yeah.
So he was able to save face in that situation, and it worked. He didn't call her that again.
Gorgeous.
Next thing you know, they're in a one-to-one conversation, and he actually apologized to her.
Is that right? Fantastic.
Which I think is incredible. And I think that's testament to her doing it in the right way. So, you know, there absolutely are moments for bringing that person down publicly and allowing them to lose face, you know, essentially humiliating them. That's the extreme. And that's about burning bridges, you know. So if we think about this communication on a continuum, what my client did, I'd say, was up one end, which was, you know, getting the job done, doing it in a way, excuse me, that was emotionally intelligent and really skillful. And there was a bit of a win-win outcome there, because she got her message across and he got to save face. Everybody wins. Good outcome, relationship maintains. But sometimes the behavior of the person is so toxic and destructive that you actually need to burn that bridge. You need to stand up, die on a hill, make your call. And if that person feels exposed or humiliated in the process, well, so be it. So I guess you've got to think about that continuum and where does your situation sit? Do you want there to be a win-win outcome, or do you want to burn this person at the stake and, you know, make sure that they are actually exposed? Is that helpful?
It really does. And I think that kind of, you know, that prep that you're talking about before, you know, choosing your timing, reading the room, all that sort of stuff is really helpful too. Really helpful. Mel, I've got a burning question for you. Speaking of burning bridges, burning question for me is about manifestation, because so I know that manifestation has played a huge part in your life. Will you talk me through it? Talk me through what does manifestation mean for you, and what part does it play?
Okay. Well, firstly, I think I was doing it before I realized what it was.
Is that right?
I think, I was doing it as a kid, you know.
Yeah, fantastic.
I manifested a career in television as a kid. Oh my gosh. Absolutely.
How cool.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah. All of my playing was, you know, I'm putting a show together, and, you know, it was always, and then I have, you know, a life in the performing arts as well. So, you know, that all sort of happened. But in terms of the intentional stuff, oh my gosh, from little things like, I really believe in act as if, you know, the process of acting as if you've already achieved something, or you've already arrived at the goal, you know. So one simple little thing I did years and years ago, before I was even aware of the whole idea of manifestation, was when business cards were still a thing. Remember those little paper things we used to have? I do. When they were still a thing, I had written on there psychologist, blah blah blah, all the things that I did, and I wrote speaker. Although I had never been on a stage to speak professionally in my life. And, you know, some might say, oh, that's just lying. Well, in my mind, it wasn't lying, because I was dead certain that if someone called me on it and said, okay, I'd like to book you, would you get up on stage and speak, that I would nail it. So it didn't feel deceitful in any way to me, because I was describing. Sorry? It
felt genuine for you.
Because I was describing what I could do. I could do that. And, you know, sure enough, down the track now that is clearly something that I do. But the same with all of the TV stuff. You know, I remember when I was doing my coach training, which was through Fire Up Coaching, Shout out to Kath at Fire Up Coaching. I love the program so much. I did it twice. I literally went through the accreditation twice. And yeah, it was incredible and very much NLP based. And one of the techniques that I remember Kath took me through, we were doing a demo for the rest of the group, and she used me as an example, doing a vision walk, which is all about manifesting. And, you know, and one of the things that came out of that for me, and this is probably 15 years ago now, one of the things that came out of that for me that I realized was the ultimate goal, ultimate dream really for me would be to be able to blend my love for psychology and human behavior and my love for performance. And if the two of those could blend, that would be the perfect job. And, you know, there wasn't such a thing as, you know, this job that I'm doing now around then. But that's when I started having very real visualizations and thoughts and intentional, what would I say? Intentional. It's not just thinking, it's more than that, embodiment really of who I wanted to be and how I wanted to feel when I got there. And I started researching people in other countries because we weren't doing it in Australia yet. There weren't really any psychologists on TV then. And I found out who the people were who were doing what I thought I wanted to do in other countries. And funnily enough, one of those people was a woman by the name of Tracy Cox, she's actually a sexpert or a sex therapist, and she's in the UK. And she was on a TV show called Would Like to Meet, and it was essentially a dating relationship show. And she was there doing a lot of the body language stuff and communication stuff. And I looked at her and bought all her books and studied her and thought, she is someone who is doing what I believe I need to do. So it's taking the stuff that we learn as psychologists and coaches and translating that not only into lay speak, but making it entertaining so that, you know, you're actually using your performance skills as well to get the message across in a way that's really easy to digest. Fast forward, she and I actually now share the same publisher.
Oh wow.
And so,
oh my goodness.
Yes, I'm angling for a meeting as we speak.
Fantastic. How cool is that? That's
so look, I've never been one for literal vision boards. Like that's not something I've ever really taken the time to do seriously, although I do think they're a great idea. For me, it's been more embodying who it is that I want to be and talking about it. I talk things into creation because through networking and discussion and, you know, being really comfortable and to openly say, I'd love a gig in TV and not be ashamed of that. Even though, you know, for years as a kid, I was told, oh, don't get your head out of the clouds. You're a dreamer, you know, stop it and stop being so dramatic. You know? Well, guess what? Being a dreamer and being dramatic is why I've ended up with a career in media.
Perfect. No, I've loved this conversation. I love that you have, I love that you've blended the different parts of yourself. I think so many times people, particularly, you know, talking about courage and confidence, so many times people mask parts of themselves that they don't think will be very popular to the outside world. And I love that you've done so well at being your whole true self, even when, and like, I mean, for now, people looking at you right now might say, well, of course you're doing fantastically. You know, you're incredibly competent and you are perfectly designed for this path you're in right now. But when you started wanting that, it didn't exist.
And yeah, that's right. And you know what people also say?
Tell me.
You're so lucky.
Yes.
You're so lucky.
Yeah.
And I've written a chapter in my book about that.
Have you?
I'm not lucky.
Yeah.
I'm not lucky.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, you know, there's definitely some science behind you can create your own luck, for sure.
Yeah.
And there are similarities between, you know, people who are perceived to be lucky. They have things in common.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that they have in common is grit and willingness to do the work. It's not luck. It's, you know, it's that combination of courage and work. and perseverance and resilience and not giving up and optimism, believing that, you know, this stuff can actually come to fruition, and putting some weight behind that.
Yeah. I love that. Honestly, I've got goosebumps. And, you know, these are not, you know, it's not rocket science. As you said before, it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And your tips are so pragmatic. I absolutely genuinely cannot wait for your book to come out. I'm so excited. I'm excited so excited. So excited. You know, I believe that women do help other women. I hope that this episode has empowered you to question your willingness to go last. I hope that you will embrace balance, and I'm also hoping that you will help me to help other women to do the same. So how can you help? Show your support for the work. Subscribe and review the podcast here where you're listening. Follow the Goddess of Balance on Instagram to catch some cheeky behind the scenes and extras. Connect with me on LinkedIn and share the posts with your network. That would be sensational. If you have enjoyed this program, this episode, you will no doubt love my group coaching program. You got to find all the links to these in the little written blurb for this episode. Thank you, my friend, for normalizing balance with me. We are raising performance and reputations, wellness and equality. Together, we're creating positive change for working women, starting with you. Sincerely, I thank you for being part of the movement.